Hello, I'm Sarah, the Gallifreyan Ravenclaw. So here, as promised, I'm sure you've read the title, is my review of the final series of Ghosts, plus a few predictions of the Christmas special that's still to come. So I'll go through episode by episode. That's probably the easiest way to do it, as I didn't do a review for each episode. The first one, with the April Fools, I have only watched them all once, so apologies if I do get anything wrong. I liked the whole idea of they all expected Pat would be the easy one and Julian would be the hardest, and then Julian was got within about 3 seconds and Pat was the only one she never actually got. I did, if you saw my series predictions, then you'll know that I did call that Alison would get pregnant. I wasn't expecting it in episode 1, but I did predict that. So when she threw up in the flower pot, I was going, And yeah, that inspector. I love that the logic was, you must be telling the truth because no one would come up with such a ridiculous story. Because, yeah, it did sound stupid, even without Mike almost admitting about the ghosts like 5 times during it. Who would say, oh yeah, it got struck by lightning. And oh yeah, I got struck by lightning as well. And I was being attacked by a stuffed bear at the time. Like, come on. So, yes, I don't think any of us would have believed that story if we were the inspector. So I loved her logic of, it's so stupid it must be true. But obviously the beginning did get me wondering of if there is any way that Alison would lose that ability. And something like having a baby might, with the hormones, actually do something like that. Caused her at some point to not be able to see the ghosts. So I wouldn't have been surprised if that had been a storyline later on. Obviously, we've now seen the rest of the series. It wasn't. Although, after the birth could still be a time, which would then be why the series ended. And then episode 2. Not a lot memorable in episode 2, I'll be honest, in the scope of the whole series. But it was obviously Mike starting to come to terms with the fact he was going to be a father, as obviously the last episode had ended pretty quickly after that announcement. And then them trying to work on the financial stuff, because they've been broke since series 1. We know this. And even with the insurance making up for some of the gatehouse, that's not a long-term solution. So obviously that's why they were looking to sell some things. And I did like the fact that the man who was there to value their items did discover why they were trying to sell some items. And then Kitty still not quite understanding how pregnancies work, and then believing that she was pregnant. But as she didn't know how babies are created, there was no way she could be pregnant. And then the North and South debate that Julian and Pat were having the whole episode was quite funny, especially when Thomas gives the "but I'm Scottish" bit. You go, sorry? What do you mean you're Scottish? The most ironic thing about that part is actually Simon is the only one of the 6 from the North, and Jim is generally from the South. So they were having this whole argument when actually they're from the wrong ones. So I actually found it more ironic by the fact that the behind the scenes is the wrong way round. But then Robin's speech about everyone being human was quite deep, certainly for Robin. So, episode 3. One of the ones I obviously predicted what was going to happen in, because I went through Kitty's death. If you haven't seen my predictions video, I'll link it at the end, or you can go and find it now. But basically, I went through the common theories with her sister poisoned her, and I even said she died of an allergy to the pineapple. So, to be fair, I don't know if this was just me, but it felt to me like the writers had basically gone online and read every single theory written about how Kitty died. And then the ghosts went through them until they got to the one none of us had predicted. So, and they even had that she discovered something she shouldn't. It was lots of people had said something happened during hide and seek. Lots of people said her sister poisoned her. Lots of people said it had something to do with the pineapple. And it just feels like this episode was written based on those sentences. Like the writers just read those online and went, that's a good idea. Let's make the entire episode, make them think that they're right and then make it all wrong. Almost like, in Death in Paradise, if it was that, where they have each suspect they find a motive for the whole way through. So they go to each one in turn. They did that with each theory that people had and then proved it was none of the above. Which was which was obviously kind of unexpected. We were all kind of expecting that one of them would be right, but they just sort of dismissed all our theories. But having an actual team of ghosts doing exactly what we'd all been doing, going around asking all the questions, was quite a good way to do it. And then there was the bit with the safe. And with Mike, I was literally going, don't shut the door every time he shut the door, because it was inevitable he was going to get stuck in there. Because he's right, he does have a habit of that. The roof, the inflatable ball. Yeah, he does have a habit of getting stuck in awkward places. So getting stuck in the safe was kind of inevitable. But I liked that meant him and Barclay got that sort of man-to-man moment where they both showed each other their vulnerabilities. And Barclay even went, oh, you'll be a great dad. And started bigging them up, and then obviously gave them it for 50%, which he'd been trying to rip them off before because he knew how desperate they were. But he actually decided to be the nice person and give it, going, they're a young couple who need the money. I'm actually going to be nice for once. So Barclay is all right sometimes. Although then he turned up with all those boxes of toys and it was, oh, here's an entire truck full of stuff. That looks like you're just trying to get rid of all your stuff. That doesn't look like you're trying to be helpful by that point. That looks like you're just trying to save a trip to the tip. So I did love that they actually had an explanation for Kitty that none of us had thought of. I did love that there was an explanation for Kitty that none of us had thought of and none of us had seen coming. So I love the fact that it was also Robin was the one who solved it, because the problem was Kitty is now one of the oldest. So finding witnesses to her death is actually quite difficult now, because they said Mary and Annie would have been useful witnesses. But Mary and Annie aren't there anymore, so they couldn't ask them. So having it actually be Robin solved it without realising was a bit like when Humphrey figured out the truth about Thomas's death. Because everyone had their different stories, but only Humphrey knew about the letters and figured out that it was the cousin who'd done it. So, also I think quite a lot of people will agree with this, but I was certainly thinking when Eleanor was giving that whole speech to a dying Kitty, that that's the reason Kitty won't hear a word against her. Because she may have been slightly aware when she was alive that Eleanor wasn't always that lovely, but she sort of ignored it, and then with that speech that just eliminated any memory in her head of Eleanor ever being mean to her. So that's why she'll never hear a word against her or even admit that Eleanor wasn't always that nice to her. So I'd like to think that if Kitty had survived, Eleanor would have actually been nice and would have kept her word. But it's hard to tell, and obviously Kitty did confirm that Eleanor is Alison's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma. Which kind of explains the family bit, although we still never got the explanation on why Kitty was there. So we assumed she was adopted in from overseas. But we never really found out. I kind of wish in Eleanor's speech she just said like one more sentence about where Kitty came from, because I don't think we're going to find that out now. But they obviously couldn't be biological sisters, and I think she did say something about when you came. So I wish she just added a few more words with a bit more information about that, because that's going to be slightly annoying that I'm assuming that's now not going to be addressed. So on to episode 4. Now this one, interestingly, did something else I said I wanted. I suggested that if they wanted any sort of continuation spin-off series, it should be Robin through the ages to see what Robin got up to and meet some of the other ghosts. Well, we met, I think that was William, he said, who he saw move on the same day that Humphrey moved in. So then Robin had no one to talk to, so he befriended Humphrey's wife and learnt French from her and her maid. So we actually saw more of Robin's life as a ghost throughout his time, which is something I said I wanted to see. Which is what I said I wanted to see more of. And it kind of gave us a bit more of an insight on Humphrey's life as well. Because we knew his death story, we knew about his wife. But it was quite heavily inferred that he wasn't that great a husband before. But we actually saw what that was like for his wife. I can't remember her name. But we actually got to see from her point of view what was going on. And certainly once she lost her maid, because then she couldn't speak to anyone. Humphrey hadn't tried that hard to learn French. So in return she hadn't tried that hard to learn English, because they'd probably have both taught each other. But as her maid was the only one who spoke to her, then she didn't need to know much English. But I like the fact that Robin seems to be better at his second language than his first, because he learnt his English presumably from sort of other people who lived in the area. So I'd almost say he learnt it from like Mary's village and the Plague people. And those sorts of villages, when they were there, was when Robin learnt English. So I find it interesting that actually he learnt French better in just 15, 20 years probably that she lived there. Whereas his English still isn't that great 1,000 years later, and after he's had all these other ghosts to speak to. But the whole bit with the translator and Mike trying to get around him and just confusing each other by going, bonjour, bonjour to you. No, you. No, you. And it's, yeah, the translator wasn't being very helpful with that, but Mike was just also confusing him. But that's why they tried to get rid of him. And the quiz show. I certainly enjoyed Pat's Blankety Blank, but I think he needed to be the host because none of the others were really getting the format. Maybe they should have asked Alison to put an episode on and then they would have got it. Probably Pat doesn't realise it's still on. So episode 5. So episode 5 was one we kind of knew what was going to happen because of the trailer. Because I said in the trailer it was very obvious that they believed one of them was about to move on. Now, I was actually trying to work out whether there would be any way for the whole ghost group and Alison to get together and work out whether there is any science behind it. And that would obviously involve knowing the dates of death and moving on for all the ghosts they know of. And I don't know how easy they'd be able to do that. Mary, even Alison could answer what that date was. Annie was recent enough that I think probably one of the ghosts could tell you what year it was, and obviously Robin remembers what date it was because the whole point was it was the anniversary. And as I said before, we actually know that William passed on the same day Humphrey moved in, so hopefully Humphrey would be able to answer that date. So that would only leave the other man, who I can't remember his name. But would they know that all the dates of death of those would be another matter. But if Alison actually helped them do the maths and figure out if there was any logic, those were the numbers they'd need. So I'd like to believe that he's right, that there is some logic, but obviously he did the maths wrong. But it got all it got all the ghosts thinking, because normally moving ons are such sudden things that they don't have a chance to sort of go, okay, it's my last day on Earth, what am I going to do? And so it was interesting to see how they all addressed that. So Robin, it just meant saying goodbye to his mouse family and some of the other animals probably. Because he's been there so long, he doesn't really feel he has any attachments. Then like Lady Button trying to go skinny dipping, but her clothes obviously reappeared. She should have just jumped in anyway, even when her clothes reappeared, but I did like the bit with her on the bike. Thomas being worried that he's not leaving a legacy. So I felt like that probably should have been continued more of, he got Alison to write down more of his poems, because she was willing to write one down a couple of episodes earlier for the competition, but then he ended up submitting Fanny's one. But I feel like whatever that one he quoted at them was, and was surprised they didn't know the next line, even though both Pat and the captain could tell him he'd said it 387 times or whatever. So why hasn't he said that one to Alison and got her to write that down? And then at very least it would be handwritten on one of the books on the shelf, and he would feel he'd left a legacy. So I feel like that should have been continued afterwards. But I don't know if the ghosts ever really told Alison what they did that day, and that they believed one of them was going to move on. Because I also feel like they should have been factoring Alison in to some of the stuff. Like, Alison got back after midnight. If Robin had been right and a minute earlier one of them had gone, and she walked into that room and they went, they've just gone. They saw how it affected her when Mary went. I feel like when they suspected that one of them might move on, it might be nice for one of them to tell her that they suspected one of them was going to move on that day, and then she could say goodbye to them all, at least, before she went out for the evening. And then obviously the big revelation was the captain right at the end, admitting about the day he died, which he said obviously Albert, Pat and Julian probably know most of that. They were all there that day, and so this made it clear that he hadn't actually told them. I wondered if he had already told Pat and Julian and we were only going to see him telling Alison. But they said she's been living there 5 years, so you'd assume she's asked all the ghosts by now how they died. And maybe it was one of the others said, don't ask Captain. And so we got the 2 facts we wanted. Well, 3, I suppose. He confirmed, as everyone knew, that he was gay. But what I was more interested about with that is he actually confirmed he knew. Because I'd almost taken it as he was so pretending he wasn't that he hadn't even admitted it to himself. But he clearly admitted in that flashback that to Havers that he did like him. So that means he was aware. That means the captain is aware that he's gay. Because I sort of thought he was so in the closet he was pretending that he didn't even think he was. Certainly in the sketch earlier this year, where Kylie said it and he sort of went, oh yes, the service people. Like, he was so deep in pretending he didn't know that I honestly was surprised to learn he had actually ever admitted it. But him and Havers called each other their first names. So we finally learnt his name is James. We didn't get a surname. I kind of assumed at some point that, like the other guy who interrupted him saying Captain, they could have just easily had him say Captain, I don't know, whatever his surname is. So then at least we got his full name, and we then got his name a minute later. But that also explained why his medals were upside down. And as we said from the trailer, it was obviously a VE Day party, but it was after he'd left there. So we don't actually know where he was transferred to after he left Button House. But he wasn't supposed to be at that party, but he knew Havers would be, and so we needed to find him. So we were actually wrong that Havers didn't die, because most people assumed Havers didn't make it back from the front line. That almost makes it sadder that actually it's then Havers was still there and did want to be with him. And so if he hadn't died that day, him and Havers would have got together. Well, secretly, obviously, because it was illegal at the time. And then the bits in the club. They certainly showed why they shouldn't go clubbing anymore. Alison spent the entire time complaining the music was too loud, and the security guard and Mike was just the best bit. Because the security guard was obviously going like, something's dodgy's going on in there. If you've been in that toilet for so long, he obviously thought he was doing something. But then he went around him just asleep. He went, I've been a security guard 20 years and I've never seen something. This is the saddest thing I've ever seen. So then he just goes, you got old, because I think that security guard was probably about the same age as Monk, and is perfectly aware he couldn't do that anymore. Certainly not with Mike having had double shots, and then ending up having quadruple shots because Obi and his girlfriend are too posh for shots and have wine. So Mike just kept having constant shots because he was having to drink for 4. Also, the line dancing scene when they got back from the club was great because they'd been trying to find some spontaneous fun. They come in to find the ghosts have now finally done what Pat's been trying to get them to do all day. And then then Alison obviously just went, right, stand there. One of the ghosts moved up, and then they were able, could copy Pat and he could copy her. So they had some great fun doing that, even after he'd been asleep on the toilet in the club. So the final episode of the series, I know there's still the Christmas special, they did what lots of us were expecting. There was obviously another offer for the place to be a hotel. And as all the excavations in the basement finished a number of years ago, and that was the only reason they couldn't sell it last time, it was interesting for them to get back to that, because they were perfectly willing to sell the place at the end of Series 1. It was just the plague victims in the basement stopped that. So that's no longer an obstacle. So as soon as a new offer came in, the natural thing would have been, of course they'll take it. Certainly with the baby on the way, they'd need the money. I love that I love when they made their pros and cons list, Alison put ghosts on both sides because she couldn't work out whether it was a good or a bad. I'd say that would depend on the new property, because we saw when they went house shopping in the first series that she found some of them were worse, like the high up one where she had those 2 German soldiers waving at her from their invisible plane. And so having ones like that, so she'd obviously miss those ghosts, but it would depend on the new place, what the ghosts are like, whether there are any, and how she would feel with that. And then there was the whole bit with Obi and his girlfriend. That was quite predictable. I was saying in the first second, yeah, her phone's broken. Yeah, she's talking about her phone. Like, I thought that was quite obvious. I was laughing at the fact that Mike didn't realise, especially when she said later that she'd even told Obi the day before her phone wasn't working. What I loved was he was so heartbroken, he was going on about it for like 2 hours. And within about an hour, Thomas has gone, oh, shut up. Get over it. It's been ages. When half an hour earlier he was saying, oh, the first 100 years are the worst. So he's still heartbroken over his love, who died 200 years ago. Yet Obi's not allowed to be heartbroken for an hour because Thomas can't deal with him. So Thomas wouldn't be able to deal with himself, would he? But he didn't quite realise that he's worse than that. But obviously we learnt that Alison still wasn't aware of what had happened in the first episode. But actually they technically showed more than they did in the first episode. If I remember correctly, in the first episode, it's sort of Julian's reaching out and you don't see what he did. Whether he sort of just reached out and him touching her made her jump and she fell, or whether he physically we never really saw in Series 1, but in this one it was quite a bit more implied, certainly, that the other ghosts believe it was the second one. And Julian didn't contradict that. He didn't go to the others, no, I didn't touch her, which I'm sure he did in Series 1, so he did kind of admit it. But I did like that politicians never apologise anyway, but I liked that in the end he didn't apologise, not because he was refusing to apologise, but actually he went, why would I be sorry for meeting you? You would never have met us. We'd just be here watching you get on with your life. You'd never know we existed. Because there's no denying that their deaths have been different since Alison's been able to see them. Because they've been able to do more things, having someone who can help them. And I think they're right that we saw at the beginning of the series how upset she was when she thought she'd lost the ability to be able to see them. So if you honestly said, if you click your fingers right now, you've never been able to see them and you don't remember ever knowing them. I don't think she'd do it. I don't think she would click her fingers and be able to not see them and never remember that she's ever known the ghosts. I think she wouldn't do it. And I liked that Mike's list was entirely cons bar one pro, which was just, I love it here. Because he often gets shafted out the way, everything's on Alison's terms. We know that. But to actually have it that he genuinely went, no, I love it here. If you're happy here, I'm happy here. And that they agreed, despite all the obstacles that are going to come, obviously with money and everything, that they'll that they agree it's still the right place for them to live. And the whole Kitty and the baby's gender thing, as soon as she accidentally poked her head in and went, oh, I saw the baby's gender, I bet she just saw the umbilical cord. And as soon as she said to anyone, it's a boy, I went, yeah. She just saw the umbilical cord. So I love that they've now sort of set the rule of like, no one stick your head in because they don't want to know the gender. And if you tell Kitty, every ghost will know. Even Humphrey knew. Also, actually, Humphrey has had his head on a lot more this series than normal. I think in series 1, he literally had it on the last 30 seconds. And first 30 seconds or whatever. So I have enjoyed that he has actually had his head on a bit more. Certainly, and in the moving on episode, because I said, Kitty said exactly what I did, of he probably can't move on disconnected. So, predictions for the Christmas special. Now, I actually had an argument with my dad about this straight after the final episode, because he was saying, well, I think it's quite obvious what happens on Christmas Eve. I think it's quite obvious what's going to happen in the Christmas special. How many Christmas specials of programmes have a pregnant lady giving birth on Christmas Eve? Probably stranded in the middle of nowhere. That's going to happen. So their place is pretty in the middle of nowhere. So I think it's highly probable that Mike's going to have to deliver the baby. And hopefully Alison can be shouting some instructions that ghosts are shouting at him. But we'll see. But there were some other predictions. So what I was just having the argument with my dad about was, he went, oh, what I want to happen is the baby comes out and waves at the ghosts. And I went, you don't remember the Christmas special from a couple of years ago. Babies can see ghosts anyway, in Mary's words, until they're walkers. And I even explained that in the American version it's actually older, because he hasn't watched that. So, I'm going to continue with my prediction of, I still want the last scene of the last episode to be Mike falling down the stairs. And then looking up at the ghosts and them all crowding round him, a bit like the end of episode 1. But I said, there is always the possibility that having a baby actually does affect it. Maybe something a bit like my dad said, but actually it is somehow she passes the power on to the baby. But that wouldn't be obvious in one episode unless the last scene's set like 10 years in the future. I very much doubt they'll do that. I would be extremely surprised to learn that the last scene is, like in Harry Potter, sort of 10 years later. And the baby's now grown up. I would quite like one thing to happen is when the paramedics can't get there or whatever, that actually Barclay turns up to help. Maybe even Obi and his girlfriend, and sort of just have a kind of reunion of like everyone who's been a main part of the series for the final episode. Maybe even tell Obi about the ghosts, because I said I'm quite upset that they still haven't told anyone else. I'd quite like Mike's family to be there again. Maybe even have Mike's family and them actually learn about the ghosts. Because it's been years now. They'd probably believe them. They'd probably be able to persuade them. Because if they come to stay again, I think they kind of need to learn about the ghosts. So I'd like that to happen, but I don't know if it will. So to sum up in the Christmas special, my final predictions for the Christmas special, I think there's going to be, well, obviously the baby will be born. I'd like Mike's family and Barclay to be there. I think Mike's going to end up delivering the baby with a bit of help from some of the ghosts, because, well, certainly Lady Button would know how to deliver a baby, as she's the only mum. And I said I've always wanted the last scene to be Mike having some accident that means he can now see the ghosts. So fingers crossed that will happen. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section, and I did promise a review of series 1 of US Ghosts. That will still be coming as soon as I finish it. I've been watching it for about 6 months and I haven't watched an episode in about 3. So I will get back to that soon, and then there will be a review. But I said the next month is going to be quite Doctor Who heavy, so if you're not interested in Doctor Who, apologies. So click here for the predictions I had at the beginning of the series. So if you want to watch that. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Bye.